Good evening, I'm back from Florida. And drugs, that's the big story of the day. Now look, there's no question we have a very serious drug problem in this country. The use of illegal drugs is of a scale that is very hard to believe. A recent report suggests that up to 1 million people take occasionally, or sometimes regularly, cocaine. To me, that's a nonsense. I'd be surprised if the number in London wasn't somewhere near that. I'm astonished by just how many people use this drug. And yesterday, we have to give credit to the Sunday Times for exposing that drugs are very much at the heart of the establishment. And they listed out a number of toilets within the House of Commons where traces of cocaine were found. And they were offices very, very close, ironically, to Boris Johnson's office and indeed Priti Patel's office too. So drugs are everywhere. And I'm tempted to say to Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, as they launch a big national 10-year programme to deal with the drug problem, well, once you've sorted out the drug problem in the Palace of Westminster, perhaps I might start to take you rather more seriously on dealing with the drug problem across the whole of the country. And here's Boris. He's been out on patrol. There he is, dressed up in a police uniform. Looks like they must have found a fairly big jacket for him, it seems to me. I was expecting to see him up in the north of England with families who've been without power for the last 10 days. But no, he has been out there on patrol with the police. And I guess that's the photo op that he wants. Priti Patel is talking tough. An article in today's Daily Mail suggesting that those that are found to be recreationally using drugs like cocaine and other Class A drugs could have their driving licences or their passports removed from them. Yes, isn't our Home Secretary good at talking tough? Is this all for real? Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think the Conservatives are in trouble. They're down in the polls. The approval rating of both the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary are going down rapidly. And I think this war on drugs is an attempt to reach out to their base. And I also, my instinct immediately that I saw this story was I don't believe for one moment they'd even be allowed to take away people's passports or people's driving licenses or forms of ID, given, of course, that the one part of Brexit that wasn't done and never gets talked about is we're still signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights. It's the same message Priti's been giving us about dealing with the problems in the Channel, but not actually having the legal means to do so. So my debate this evening, is the Tory war on drugs real? Love to know what you think. Do you think they're genuine? Do you think, like me, it is cynical political manoeuvring? Let me know your thoughts. GBViews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet your opinions on Twitter at GBNews. And of course, you can send in your the Farage questions for the end of the show. Well, joining me to debate this is Diana Constantinidi, a human rights barrister for 33 Bedford Row, and musician and recovering addict Laurie Wright, who's been helping other addicts to go to rehab. So, Laurie, we know there's a very serious problem here, and we'll talk about that and perhaps what some of the remedies might be. But I want to begin, if I can, Diana.
Yes.
OK, it's a big political moment for the Prime Minister, for the Home Secretary, and instinctively, when people hear the government's taking drugs seriously, the majority of the population say, well, yeah, actually, they should be doing this, because, I mean, there's barely a family in the country that hasn't been touched by this problem in some way. But the tough talk.
It is indeed tough talk, isn't it? And
Yeah.
This very much reminds me of this ancient Greek myth, actually, of Plutarch, that they will be tossing the Spartan babies if they do not fit for the future duty to be soldiers. So it feels like this tough talk is about tossing the drug users into the abyss of those disproportionate measures. So indeed, those are tough talk. And the question is this a war or peace? So we really need to consider this very carefully, especially from a human rights perspective.
Yeah, I mean, every year we hear the war on drugs, and we've heard it ever since Tony Blair's time, and every year we've been losing the war on drugs because more and more, it seems to me, more and more people use this stuff. And I have to say, working in London, as I have done, for nearly all of my working life, I'm actually quite shocked the percentage of young people I know who do or have taken Class A drugs at some point in their lives. Just explain to me then, we are, for good or bad, and you may take a different view on this, but for good or bad, we have a Human Rights Act in this country which incorporated the European Convention of Human Rights into British law back in Tony Blair's time in the late 1990s.
That's very correct, Nigel. And you did say that we're still signatory of the European Convention of Human Rights, and also to the Human Rights Act 1998 that actually addresses all these issues. So the first one that we need to look into is that the passport and the driving license, that's an important piece of documentation. And if someone would take that from you, it means that, it can become a property for someone else. So this is a very serious statement to make, and we cannot take this lightly. Saying that, the question is now, driving license, how does this fit into the drug war? What I mean by that is driving license, if we're dealing with the driving offence, yes, fair enough, but we're not dealing with the driving offence here.
Well, the idea, I guess, is, or the thinking is, well, number one, it's the mood music. We're going to be really tough. But I guess the idea is that you punish users to such an extent that you frighten other people from using this stuff. And I guess that's what it is. And I guess this is aimed at what they would say middle-class, comfortable drug use. People who might lose their jobs over it or whatever it may be. But under the Human Rights Act, would they be able to do this?
I believe not, Nigel. And I'm saying that's because if you would remove or if you would confiscate, so the question is now, under which legal framework would they actually deal with this matter? So they haven't addressed yet the issue about, is it going to address the first-time offenders? Can we actually apply and to see how long this sentence will be in place? So they haven't addressed the legal issue, and that's actually infringes the first human rights about, we need to know what the law is about it. So not just about talk. But secondly, this is a disproportionate measure. And that's the Human Rights Act. It needs to be appropriate to address the problem in question, which is not.
So if, for argument's sake, some people did have their driving licences or passports taken from them because they've been found to be in possession of a quantity of cocaine, for argument's sake, you as a human rights barrister would be expecting a phone call fairly quickly.
Indeed, yes.
Could be very good for your business. But it does rather back up my feeling and my thinking that this is all political posturing. What is for real, Laurie, is that, this stuff's everywhere. And the fact that it's actually there, 11 locations.
Out of 12.
In the Palace of Westminster.
Yeah.
And I think there was a report a few years ago about the London sewers and just the sheer amount of cocaine.
Yeah, well, it's actually in the water as a result of it, isn't it? They found minuscule amounts that couldn't be eradicated as a result of that. But it doesn't shock me. You were saying about how shocked you were, and I've been around it for so many years, and even in rehab with people from all walks of life, from government officials to police officers, therapists, musicians like myself, teachers. Drugs are just everywhere. They're a part of society, and to continue to punish as opposed to look at the mental health aspect, because we know it's a mental health problem. Well, maybe we don't. That's the problem. Maybe we don't know it's a
perhaps taking drugs is what leads to mental health problems.
Yeah, but why do we take drugs excessively in the first place? Underlying mental health problems, feelings of inadequacy.
Do you really think so?
Yeah, generally.
I mean, isn't it rather like legal drugs, alcohol?
It is.
Tobacco. I mean, no one starts off as a problem drinker. They start off drinking because it's what people do and it makes you feel good. Isn't most drug use a bit like that?
Yeah, but not everyone will become an alcoholic who's a drinker, and not everyone who recreationally takes cocaine or anything else will become an addict. So it's about looking compassionately at that, I think, of what, for instance, what I think we should do is look at what, like, say, Portugal have done, for instance, in 2001.
Now, that's a decriminalisation programme.
Yeah. And then, one of the good things that's come, the only good thing I can see that's come of this is more money will be put into rehabilitating people under Boris Johnson's new suggestions, but to then kind of double-edged sword that with harsher penalties, it's like 1950s dad getting the belt out, and that just does not help an addict.
All right, but you know, just put this to you. You know, if at the moment, if you're a middle-class professional living in London, for argument's sake, recreationally taking cocaine once a month or whatever it may be, if you're currently caught in an environment like that, you know, you just get a caution. I mean, that's what happens right now. And what Patel is saying in this article and what Johnson is backing up is that, you know, if now getting caught isn't a caution and it is a removal of passports, of driving licenses, perhaps even a threat to your job, that would stop people taking it recreationally, wouldn't it?
Well, no.
No?
I just disagree. I mean, I can only talk from the addict perspective that nothing would have stopped me. And also, not as an addict. If we look at, say, Prohibition in America, where they made alcohol illegal, the recreational users still went and found moonshine and speakeasies, for instance. And the same thing just goes on. Whatever happens, people will find it. I know.
But there are people watching this now, all right? There are people watching this now who have got teenage kids.
Yeah.
Right? And they're going to say, listening to you, if we listen to Laurie, if we decriminalise drugs, that will make our kids even more likely to take them.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily. For instance, if you look at Portugal, their numbers have actually decreased since in the last 2 decades of people aged 15 to 25 using drugs, and they decriminalise. It's about just say no didn't work. Like, what do you do as a teenager? You go, oh, I shouldn't do that. Don't press the red button. It's that rebellion. It's that I shouldn't be doing that.
Of that.
I know from personal experience, when I was in my teens, it was, you know, you shouldn't do that. Why? It's exciting. Let's find out.
But to get people, I mean, you know, you've obviously been through quite a bad cycle with this, and you've gone into rehab, and you're out, you're playing music again, getting out there, gigging, doing well, which is great, and I'm very pleased to hear that story. But to get people into rehab, they first have to get themselves in quite a bad place, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, rock bottom would be where you would have those realisations, or many rock bottoms, as I found before I realised. So, yeah, it has to come from the person to choose to want to go to get the rehabilitation. But when they want to go, we need to make sure that is in place. I would argue state-funded, because people need to go now. The waiting lists are very long. And by the time you've gone on this waiting list and convinced yourself you're okay after a few days or weeks abstinence, you would end up back in the same cycle. And unless the money's there from family members or whoever else, other funding.
All right. And rehab has worked in your case, but
But
I'm sure in many cases it doesn't.
Yes, it doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. No,
I'm sure that's right. Well, you know, I've listened to what you've had to say. I have to say, I have thought myself in the past, particularly with cannabis, you know, that maybe a royal commission into this where we do study what's really happened in Portugal might be a good idea. I don't think that position has majority support in the country. I think most people still think that it should be against the law. And what we've got is a government here, I think, in a sense, Diana, talking tougher in terms of penalties than any government's talked before. And we've already said that it just isn't going to happen. All the while, we're signed up to the Human Rights Act and the ECHR and everything else. It's just, this is a big push. You know, they're in trouble, they're going down on the polls, they're doing this. But just how much time, you know, police time, court time, prison spaces, I mean, this is a real blight on the whole criminal justice system too, isn't it?
It is indeed. And listening to you and to your personal circumstances, it just made me realise that the cases that I've dealt with people that they actually used drug in the past and would have been prosecuted, Every case is so different. So it's about addressing all those points, everything that you just mentioned as well, in their sentencing guidelines. So definitely there needs to be a lot of work to be done in order to be able to address all those issues. So it's not just one way. It has many colours.
Yeah, no, thank you both.